common phenomenon between right-wing totalitarian states, such as the one that we are fashioning at the moment, is the practice of social Darwinism. And what this does is very simple. Darwin said that evolution is based on the survival of the fittest. Human beings survive, dinosaurs don't, because we are better suited to our environment. And human beings have done this by adapting their environment, by creating things like cities and farms and so on and so forth, flood defences, etc. Social Darwinism is similar in that between people, the strong survive and the weak don't. Taken to its extreme, it's the duty of the strong to get rid of the weak. And the most extreme example of this is obviously the Holocaust in Europe between 1942 and 1945. I'm not suggesting that we're going to have a Holocaust in England. We won't. However, what we are seeing is very much the survival of the strongest to the detriment of the weakest in our society. Anybody who's seen the film I, Daniel Blake, will have seen an albeit fictionalised and yet highly believable account of a gentleman who, through circumstances, becomes vulnerable, falls through a crack in the social welfare provision and ends up dying because he's weak and vulnerable. The strong will succeed, the weak will die. A friend of his, again through no fault of her own, ends up going to food banks and selling herself into prostitution because she is vulnerable, and again, welfare does not care for her. Much of Tory thinking is to do with the strength of the individual. The Americans call it rugged individualism. We can all go out to the frontier and survive by murdering Indians and nicking their land. Also, if we can pay for our health insurance, we'll get everything that we need to stay healthy and we'll be cared for. If we can't pay for health insurance, well, we'll just be ill and die. We have got used to the idea in this country that the state will look after us, and so we have at the same time this dichotomous understanding of how it works, in that we want to vote for the Tory government, who will destroy the public sector very clearly. They'll cut police numbers, they'll cut hospitals and so on and so forth, schools, and we will have to pay for all of these things. And if you can't pay, tough, you will die, or just have to deal with the rubbish rump of public sector provision. And that's an encouragement for you to get out there and do things, be entrepreneurial, make a fortune. That way, if we incentivise all of these things, more and more people will make wealth, and that'll be better for the country. I'm not sure where fairness comes in. I'm not sure what people want. I don't know if they think this is a good idea, and yet they will vote for it in their millions, which seems slightly strange, but they will. And those at the bottom will suffer even more. The last part of social Darwinism is this: being vulnerable is not necessarily to do with your own personal qualities. And that's something that really is at the crux of this. We can all become vulnerable very, very quickly. We are only seconds away from a brain aneurysm, a stroke, a hemorrhage, falling downstairs, being knocked over by a car, etc., etc. These things are moments away, potentially, from everybody. And no amount of money will change that. And therefore we are all potentially dependent on the welfare state. Only the mega rich, you might say, are not dependent on the welfare state, but even they can be placed in very vulnerable positions. Look at Michael Schumacher, for example, which is very sad, and yet he's a multimillionaire. The happiest people, we're led to believe, are the Danes and the Norwegians, who pay a vast amount of tax, and in doing so ensure they have a very effective welfare state which will look after them should they need it. We are voting to go in the other direction. It's every man for himself. Which for some of us is a terrifying thought.